trust those seeking the truth, fear those who have found it. Right?
That's
and,
right.
And I was talking with Steve about how a lot of these ateliers that are training artists have produced a lot of people who paint the same.
Right.
And he said, I say no to every artist when they initially get out of an atelier.
Interesting.
And he said, because I want somebody who's got their own individual personality.
Yes.
So sometimes I'll say to him, come back to me in 5 years.
Okay.
Which could seem like an eternity if you're an artist.
It
right?
is. Yeah, it is.
And I don't think I'm as hardcore as he is. I am more interested in letting an artist experiment with me, right? And
right.
see what works.
Right.
I don't want the fully formed artist.
Yeah.
I want the artist who is having a conversation. Before I move on to that conversation part, though, I want to say that he does have a point in that if you want an artist who is individualized, who's
right.
doing their own thing, who's got their own idea, and who's doing something different. And that
yes.
can border on something that is different because it's important and it's groundbreaking and it's interesting, or it can be that it's gimmicky because it's got nothing but cat heads on humans playing cards.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And you will be able to sell a gimmick, no doubt. Right? And you can make a great living at a gimmick. I know an artist who is doing nothing but a certain kind of wildlife image.
Okay.
And that artist is doing $1 million a year in paintings.
Wow.
And can do them over and over and over again.
Yes.
And you know what? We get critical as artists of those artists.
Yes, that's true. Absolutely. Right.
This artist who's a wildlife artist, who is doing very well, it's easy to be very critical of this artist and say, you know, he's got a gimmick and he's got maybe a much higher skill level that he's applying to a lower skill endeavor. But
right.
the truth is he's got a great work ethic, right? Tremendous work ethic.
Yeah.
And the people who are buying his works and he's consistently doing right now, they're really actually buying his works at somewhat of a bargain, in my opinion. Right?
Right.
And now his problem is figuring out when he does want to expand, if he can.
Right.
And maybe if he never expands for the rest of his life,
he's painting these
subjects. And we know musicians who are like this, right?
Right.
We know
they get
people
some hits
in every category who are like this in talent, right?
Right. Right.
And I think that is the exception of a discussion. The harder discussion is not, oh, you know, you found your gimmick and how do you get out of that gimmick?
Yeah.
The question is, how do you find your voice?
Yeah.
And that is a harder discussion. And it's something that if you can find a dealer who is willing to work with you to find your own subject, and who not only is willing to let you experiment and to listen to you, but you're willing to listen to them to hear what works in the market,
not working, right?
And to not be, because some dealers, they love gimmicks, right?
Right, right.
Some dealers,
especially ones maybe, you know, again, the gallery also would cater maybe more on a pedestrian street where you get lots of, you know, just tourists walking by. You know, that kind of eye candy, kind of catching thing could be more of a thing. And if you're a gallery that's more of a destination, there's a little bit different kind of strategy, right? I've noticed that about
I think that's
galleries.
True. I think it's very true. And I think that, you know, they're not going to bring you into the gallery if you don't fit their subject on some level.
Yes,
but it becomes a long-term issue. And this is something that I hesitate to share this, but I think it's instructive. So there's a dealer who is in town, and he's represented the same artist for 25 years. Yeah. And this artist has done very well. And every year his show sells out. And I had a conversation about with the dealer and with the artist separately to ask them how they've achieved this.
Yes.
And he said, well, the first 5 years was a little rough. We were building up a book of people and who became regular clients. And they would come every year to buy this artist's work from the show. And we realized after the first couple of years that they were no longer buying work. And it's because his works were the same every year. So I said to him, why not? Last year, your paintings seemed largely to be about children. Why don't you make the works next year about animals? And the next year, why don't you, when we had the discussion, they said, you know, why don't we make them about circus? circus subjects. And they almost totally engineered every year some new thing.
Yeah.
And so every year you can go to each, and I've been to the homes of this person's collectors. You can say, oh, this is the 2007 circus piece. This is the animals piece. This is this piece. And they got the best animal work this year.
Yeah.
But the next year they got maybe the second best child piece.
And then they were thematically, or they were all by the same artist. So they must
by the same artist.
They must have a similar look, but it was the subject was different each time.
Yeah. And
right?
it feels, when I hear that, there's a part of me that cringes because I feel like it's so superficial, like you're choosing, the next iPhone that's coming out, right? And so let's make sure it's a 12 and we figure out how to brand it around that. I get that.
Right.
The other side of it that's true is, that's very important to keep in mind is, if a client comes in and has bought your work before and they don't see anything new from you or different from you.
They'll hit a saturation point, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've actually seen galleries hit and me as well, being in a gallery for 20 years, or I think the longest relationship is maybe a 15-year relationship with a gallery. I know to some degree I've maxed out on certain subjects because they already have, they have 3 or 4, and everybody that wants one has one or a couple.
Right.
And so there is that saturation point that can happen. So to some degree, I think.
Yep. And I am not going to have 2 of the same subject at the same time, right?
Yes.
They can maybe be from different approaches, entirely different. And it's also a time of year thing can happen. I don't sell many winter paintings in winter.
Oh, interesting. There's not a nostalgia for winter.
No.
But it's in the summer maybe that they
in the
feel.
summer people want a winter painting.
Yeah. Or maybe in the winter they want a spring painting, right?
And I sell spring paintings all year.
Oh, interesting.
Because people who live in winter, they want to see spring inside their home.
Yeah, so even seasons, when we talk about subject, there's certain things about certain seasons that would be more appealing.
Yeah.
I know a large client that only wants to have nothing that's dead in their work, or when they commission a work, and they want everything that looks alive and lush, and that's kind of interesting thing because they know that there's a certain kind of appeal to all of that. Is that everything's alive? They don't want dry, dead, cold kind of subjects.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting. Could be painted by the same artist, but they wouldn't pick this one that's got the dead tree in it versus one that has a little sapling that's, in the spring.
I would say maybe 30% of my clients are repeat clients, and I know their tastes. And then there's another 70% that walk through the door and buy things that I don't know. There's an old rule. I know I'm using.
So there must be certain subjects that just tend to do better, even if it's by the same artist or the same, right?
It can. This is where it gets hard. I do know. I'll give you an idea. If somebody walks in with a portfolio for the first time and shows me their work, I can tell you largely the things that I think instinctually will sell better with us because they're subjects, right? Right. But there's also an element which I call the Warnock effect. So John Warnock is the founder of Adobe. He invented the personal printer. He invented the PDF, Photoshop, Illustrator.
He's got quite a list, right?
Yeah. He basically created, in a period of 15, 20 years, $100 billion industry, right? Every graphic designer, every architect, everybody uses him in the advertising world now. Everybody uses it. It's the industry standard, right? Where would Hewlett Packard be without selling ink to personal printers? Basically invented that.
Right.
He's a client of ours. I've known him since I was 12 years old.
Right.
He was here last week, and we were having a conversation. And he said he's going to be a little critical of a rival here in this, right?
Sure.
So, but this is his perspective. This is not me sharing the perspective, right? He said, when I first started, and I was working at Xerox PARC in California, where all of these people were working. Steve Jobs is coming in and out, and they were quite close. Focus groups were a big thing, and he said, focus groups are a rear view mirror. He said, they can tell you what they like, and it's only what they know. They can't tell you what they don't know. And he said, focus groups, if you're trying to get a horse out of a focus group, you will always get a camel. You'll always get something that doesn't, it'll be everybody's. And he said, that's what Microsoft is. He was very critical, but
Yeah. Right.
I don't think that's necessarily true. But he said, but we strive to create things that nobody had ever seen before.
Right. Right.
And he said, if I took Photoshop or Illustrator to a focus group and said, what do you think about this? They had no idea what it was. And they didn't know what to do with it.
Right.
They didn't know its potential. We had to teach it to them.
Yeah.
And he said, that's what my goal was my entire life, to produce things that people hadn't imagined before that they could use.
Yeah. I think iPad is a great example of that, right?
Great example.
Everybody's wondering, well, what is it? What does it even do? And there weren't apps yet.
Some of us here know what it existed, what it was to not have apps.
Right.
Right. We remember having a phone and somebody saying to us, you can buy these individual things on this device that you've bought, and you can do things with. I mean, it sounded so abstracted at the time.
Right.
Even the idea. I remember buying something online seemed like such a crazy idea.
It was. Yeah.
Right. Like,
I remember that.
Send it to you in a box.
Yeah.
And you have to send it back. Right. You can't see it. You got to look at a picture of it.
Yeah.
I think that as a dealer, when it comes to an artist, my ideal artist is I want them to show me something I've never seen before, that's new, that I can show a client that they've never seen before, that they can get excited about.
Right.
My ideal artist is an artist who opens up new possibilities.
So it's not necessarily going to that staid, tried and true, a pig sells and then paint a pig sort of thing.
I mean, realistically, we live in a world where the history of art is so long that everything has been done on some level. Right. And so you can be quite cynical about that and say, well, I'm going to figure out then statistically what is selling in this market at this time, and I'm going to do it in this style, which is selling well. And you can calculate it down to the nth degree.
And I know they've even done that with some researchers at a university. Put together, it needs to be a historical figure.
Like Washington needs to, if it's to foreign American, George Washington needs to be. If it's French, Napoleon needs to be.
And it needs to have water in it. It needs to have, all these boxes that you check, right?